This is another episode of Take Back Your Country, where I'm talking to Peter Manuel from Flag Australia. And we're talking about issues which affect the country. And I want to begin with an incident which occurred in South Australia, where Peter Manuel lives, and his encounter with the local authorities. Peter, could you tell us what happened last night?
Yes, David, how are you anyway?
Well, thank you.
Good. I had to do a representation at the Alexandrina Council in regards to opposing GM crops. So I went along and I did my representation, and afterwards they had the voting. I had a colleague with me from Genetics, Alex Hodges, and she did her representation because we deeply oppose GM crops. And after the voting, which thank God 6 councillors voted for no GM crops in the Alexandrina Council area, and 5 voted against, which was very unfortunate. I can't understand how anybody wouldn't want to keep our clean, green food bowl. I mean, it's a wonderful marketing tool to be able to eat clean, healthy food and crops with cross-pollination, with the chemicals that are used in regards to getting rid of weeds, but it doesn't kill canola, so the canola absorbs glyphosate, and then this canola is put into food products and everything, and I think it's disgusting. It's nothing better to keep a clean, green food bowl. But when I walked out, there was a group of not just obviously greedy farmers, but other people involved in agriculture. And as I walked out, they said, well, Manuel, you're not going to get your way because the minister will override this. And the Minister for Primary Industries here now is David Basham, who used to be the president of South Australia Dairy Association. And I would think that Mr. Basham would be very silly to override council, because it's not just the Alexandrina Council now that has said that they want to stay GM free. It's also very close proximity Yankalilla Council, allegedly Victor Harbour Council, the McLaren Vale Council, also in the Barossa Valley, Mount Barker. So there's a lot of councils that are listening to their electorates and saying no to GM. So if the minister has got the power to override council, I think it is absolutely disgraceful that one man can just override this, and this sort of thing has got to be stopped. This is the sort of dictatorship that we don't need in this country, David, and I'd like your view on that.
Well, I think government should be as close to the people as possible, and the opinions of the people in that area, for example, the use of these manipulated seedlings, manipulated by scientists, heaven knows what they're going to do to people. This should be a matter for decision by the people concerned and not by somebody in the state capital. It's too important for the local people. And I believe that it causes terrible problems for farmers neighbouring on a farm where GM material is used and where that material flows off onto their farms.
Correct, David. There was an organic farmer in Western Australia who allegedly got sued by his neighbour who was growing GM, and the seed blew over to his farm. He didn't want the seed there. He couldn't help it. The wind blew it there, and he was the one that got fined. It was amazing last night. I forget where the guy was from. They had different speakers supporting GM crops, and one particular guy said, "Oh, we can build fences to stop this." I can tell you, we've had terrible winds here the last couple of days, and I don't know what sort of fence you're going to build to stop the seed blowing onto neighbour properties or for miles and miles around the country. So it's absolutely ridiculous. Obviously, Bayer, the big corporates are desperate for control. I hear that the farmers can't retain the seed. They've got to keep buying the seed from Bayer Monsanto each year. There's just too many things that just don't add up. And I think we would be very, very silly here in South Australia that the Liberal Party are really pushing to go GM. And I think they've got the State Labor Party now backing them, which the State Labor Party was against lifting the moratorium on GM. So they're very, very silly to support the Liberal Party on this. We should be like Tasmania and stay GM free. It's a huge marketing thing, and not only just from a marketing point of view. We should get a higher dollar for our produce. Doesn't matter what it is, grain or beef, sheep, whatever. So I think it's a real big loss to go GM in this state. And we know there's certain states around the country that have gone that way. I've spoken to farmers in America that said if they knew what they knew now, they would have never, ever gone down the GM track and grown GM crops. David?
Well, there's an enormous market for natural produce. Everybody seems to want natural produce. They pay a margin for it. If you go into a supermarket, that which seems to be or is held out to be more natural seems to command a much better price. Everybody wants food which is natural and clean. And why should people take risks? And the decision should be made by the people, should be made by the people in the local municipality and at the state level. That's the way it should be, not being done by bureaucrats ordering people around. Which brings me to another matter. The lockdowns still go on. We were told these were introduced to flatten the curve. That is, so the hospitals could cope with the flood of people they claimed would be coming into the hospitals. The problem was the politicians did what they seem to be doing all the time. They don't exercise their judgment for which they're elected. They all seem to go for modelling. They're using modelling in relation to climate change, as they call it, meaning global warming, and they're using it in relation to this virus which came from China. But the ridiculous thing is, having flattened the curve, having seen the hospitals coping with the very sick, very small number of people are in intensive care, very small, less than 20 the last time I looked. I think it's even lower now across Australia. There is no problem about putting people into hospital and giving them, where necessary, intensive care in Australia. Yet the lockdowns continue, and the politicians, who seem to be power drunk, are talking about lockdowns to eliminate a virus which you cannot eliminate until we get a vaccine. And the worst state is Victoria. And then, of course, we get these ridiculous border closures, which are only done for political purposes and contrary to the Constitution. Now, one of the things which we have been discussing is hydroxychloroquine. There seems to be considerable scientific evidence that, taken by those who are suffering from the virus with zinc or in other ways, can be of considerable benefit in curing the problem. There's some scientific advice, particularly earlier, which went against this. But one would have thought that this is a matter, given that it's an existing drug, this is a matter for the doctor and the patient, for nobody else. But we have the situation where in Victoria it's banned and in Queensland it's criminalised. And that seems to be wrong, because if it's saving people's lives, that means that those governments are actually letting people die, which seems to be terribly wrong. And as I say, the scientific evidence seems to be increasing that there are significant advantages to be gained through the use of hydroxychloroquine. Peter?
You're right, David. I would have thought that any decent human being, especially people in power, would give somebody every opportunity possible, that if there was a drug out there, to say, let's try anything. We can't always rely on science because you get to the stage where, who's paying that scientist to say or what? So there's a drug out there, hydroxychloroquine, that has been proven over many, many years. It hasn't just come out. I think there's a mate of mine in the Northern Territory been taking it for rheumatoid arthritis. He hasn't had any side effects at all. It's been very, very good for him. So, you know, it's just, you've got to start to wonder, has the power and the control just gone to the, when it comes to Daniel Andrews, I think Hitler would be absolutely proud of this guy, what he's doing. I think it's a disgrace. I mean, there's people out there that, they're suffering big time, being locked away in their homes, their units, flats, whatever, you know, an hour a day, whatever, or maybe 2 hours now with a bit of sunlight and so on. I mean, the sun's got so many benefits, vitamin D, A, and it goes on, fresh air and so forth. It's almost like they want people to die, David. When you look at what they're actually doing and the laws they're implementing, it looks like they want people to be stressed, suicidal. Otherwise, you wouldn't go down this track, David.
Interestingly, Victoria is a state which introduced euthanasia legislation. We're not talking about that at the moment, but I noticed that the estimated number who would kill themselves is much higher than the estimated. The actual number is much higher than the estimated number, and you seem to find there some obsession on the part of government with death. They've eased abortion laws, they've encouraged euthanasia, and now a similar thing is happening because of the way in which they maladministered. All these, the great majority of deaths in Australia, either from the virus or with the virus, seem to come from Victoria because of the mismanagement of the quarantine and mismanagement of the care in the old people's homes. And this is the state where that seems to be concentrated. Peter.
Yeah, something's got to be done, and it's got to be done quick, smart, David. We can't keep going down this track. Too many people have been affected, and I just feel, you know, we feel hopeless that we can't do anything. As far as I'm concerned, Dan Andrews should be locked up.
Very true, and I think I still believe, and I believed at the time, the National Cabinet panicked. There was no need to have a lockdown of the private sector in the way which they handled it. It could have been handled as handled in the country with world's best practice, Taiwan, which so far has had 7 deaths, and that's less than 100th the number in Australia, in a country of the same size and without the advantage of being a remote island nation. There's another matter that's come to our attention, we were discussing it, and that arose because of Snowy 2.0, which was Mr. Turnbull's plan to take water in the snow, take it uphill, and then let it go downhill and produce electricity that way. Of course, you have to use power to pump the water uphill. And a number of very eminent people are protesting about this. They say it'll only produce about half of what was promised at an enormous cost. And one of the things which they pointed out is that it will have an enormous environmental damage in the snowy area, much greater than the alleged damage of the horses, the brumbies. Now, I think you too, Peter, find the horse a particularly beautiful animal which has been so close to mankind. And if there is ever a need for a cull, and I think that has to be satisfied, that has to be proved to the satisfaction of independent authorities. But if there is a need for a cull, that should be administered in the most humanitarian ways. And I'm very wary as to whether that is going on and whether it is actually being done in an humanitarian way. Peter.
Glad you brought that up, David. And Mr. Turnbull, well, you know what I think of Mr. Turnbull and his involvement with the separation of water from land, but we won't go into that one at the moment. I haven't got much time for that guy. But getting back to the horses issue, I remember back in 2013, the Whaler horse, and there's a lot in the Northern Territory. They wanted to cull 10,000 Whaler horses in the Northern Territory. Now, the Whaler horse, for people that don't know, was a horse that was used in World War One and in the Boer War. They're a very strong, muscly horse. They can walk long distances without a drink. They can put up with very, very hot weather, and they're part of our history. And I'm like you, David. I love the horse. Yes, they're very, very close to me, and they're like our dogs. I like all animals, and all animals have got to be treated properly and looked after. And when they're killed, they've got to be killed humanely. And the Whaler horse, along with a lot of other animals around the place, camels and deer and so forth, are being shot out of helicopters. Now, how good are these shooters? Are they all headshots that these animals are getting? No, they're not. No, they're not. Some of these horses are lying on the ground suffering, and when they eventually die, you imagine 10,000 dead carcasses lying around. How good is that for the environment? And it's just a food source for pigs, wild pigs, and dingoes, foxes, whatever else. So feral animals are going to be breeding prolifically, which is absolutely disgusting. And this is all to do with the environmental mob again. And I just think it's so wrong. I would like to know how much money is wasted on this lunacy when we could be rounding these animals up and doing something constructive with them, whether it's camels or whatever, using them as a food source. But no, we seem to be just killing our food source, killing our history. And I think the people in power that are making these decisions are disgraceful. And I just think it's just so very sad, David.
Well, yes, and I think that should be continually monitored. To be cruel to our horses is an appalling thing. To leave them suffering, to leave a mother with her foal suffering, not killed, is a terrible thing to do, and this should be monitored. It is wrong to be shooting them from helicopters. I think that is a barbaric way to cull animals. Peter, I think that brings us to near the conclusion. Was there anything else?
Yes, David, just when you started talking about the Snowy 2 or whatever, it just brought to mind about Christopher Pyne when he was in Parliament. He wanted to bring in the herpes virus to be put into our main waterways to get rid of the European carp. Now, what repercussions would that have? You would have millions of dead fish floating on our waterways, taking the oxygen out of the rivers. The stench would be unbelievable. How many millions of dollars were going to be put into this? So stock wouldn't be able to drink from the waterways because of the rotten fish. You wouldn't be able to irrigate your veggies or anything like this. I mean, I think that Christopher Pyne was an absolute drongo for even suggesting that and putting that up. I mean, these guys that are in power, look, I'm sorry, David, I've lost all confidence. I really have. That is disgusting to think that you could put a herpes virus in just to get rid of the European carp and have millions and millions of dead fish. Absolute lunacy. And the Liberal Party shouldn't have even looked at it.
And we don't know where an introduced virus will stop. It doesn't stop at the target. It can spread to other animals and to humans. We have to be very careful when we do that sort of thing, and you don't do it flippantly. I agree with you. We have to be absolutely careful before we do that sort of thing to get rid of a pest. Peter, thank you very much. Our commitment here in Take Back Your Country, Take Back Australia, is to the proposition that the problems in Australia are essentially created by the politicians. And it is only by submitting the politicians to more control, by introducing a good degree of direct democracy, as in Switzerland, that this country will get back to the right track and restore common sense to public life in Australia. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, David. Much appreciated. Thank you.